Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to MAGFest 2025. This is From Heinlein to Helldivers, an abridged history of military science fiction. I am your host, Sean C.W. Korsgaard, a U.S. Army veteran, award-winning photojournalist, and author and editor of many fine books. But I have been an avid fan of military science fiction going on some 15 years here. And I will tell you everything you need to know to fall in love with this fine genre, just as I have. But before we begin, please direct your attention to the telescreen for a live broadcast and public service announcement from Super Earth.
Super Earth, our home. Prosperity. Liberty.
Hi there.
Democracy. Our way of life.
Oh, hello.
But freedom doesn't come free.
No! Sweet liberty! No! Look familiar? Scenes like these are happening all over the galaxy right now.
You could be next.
That is, unless you make the most important decision of your life. Prove to yourself that you have the strength and the courage to be free.
Join the Helldivers.
Become part of an elite peacekeeping force!
See exotic new life forms.
And spread managed democracy throughout the galaxy.
Become a hero. Become a legend. Become a Helldiver.
I can tell you when that trailer dropped, every military science fiction author in the genre was just like, yep, we're going to sell so many books. That's our genre in 2 minutes. Our panel in a nutshell, everybody. But like any good host, I am starting our panel. Let's see. There we go. By giving you homework. This is a genre that goes back to the very beginnings of modern science fiction. I can't cover everything in an hour. No one can. So if you would like to know more, these are some of the places I recommend, especially since a lot of these places give away the books I'm citing for free. You can't beat free because, like every good dealer, these publishers know the first hit's on the house. But check out books from Baen Books, Wargate, Aethon, Chris Kennedy, Canon Publishing, Iron Age Media, and more. For any of our locals, please check with the Washington Science Fiction Association, especially the yearly convention, CapPlave, every September. And please support your local bookstore and library. Authors like me depend on that. But, there we go. What is military science fiction? And what specifically makes it military sci-fi, or MIL-SF, instead of just science fiction? There are many complex definitions we could use, but the simplest is this. Any work of science fiction that prominently features and focuses on the war, soldiers, weaponry, and military lifestyle and jargon of the future. The key thing that separates sci-fi from, say, MIL-SF from, say, space opera is one key detail, though: authenticity. More so than any other genre of science fiction, its fandom will call you out if the action seems inauthentic, if it feels fraudulent, or even if you get something small like a rifle wrong. I worked for Baen Books for a few years. Do you have any idea how many emails in a given week we would get about, the rifle on the front of this book you published 5 years ago isn't completely accurate? More than one.
No, it's only slightly better than War Thunder, or at least not leaking classified military documents.
Slightly. The authors are often military veterans, but not always. Some are just history buffs or avid readers and good writers. But the dominant tone of military science fiction has changed as our tone and approach to military life and warfare has changed. And we will go over some of those transitions throughout this panel. But let's start with the beginning, pre-military science fiction. War fiction has always been popular, from the Iliad to Horatio Hornblower. The two most written about topics in all of human history, and any walk into a bookstore will reflect this, are the American Civil War and World War II. Fiction has always reflected that. And World War II is especially important for a number of reasons. Notably, the most important invention of World War II for publishing, the paperback book. From what they called the armed service editions of a number of popular books, it became the regulation size of every single paperback book that followed, able of fitting in the pocket of any uniform of a soldier to this day. 1,300 titles were published over the course of the war, and lines for them were more popular than chow halls. And they kept a number of pulp science fiction authors famous among these millions of readers. And of course, you had the pulp era. Some of you may have been here for my Sword and Sorcery panel earlier this weekend, where I talked a bit more about that. But the most popular work of science fiction for the first half of the 20th century was a series about a Virginian Civil War veteran who, upon arriving on Mars, uses his earthly biology and military background to win himself a princess, fight multi-armed space aliens, and become ruler of the Red Planet. A fellow by the name of John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And that pulp era, be it the Sword and Sorcery of Robert E. Howard or C.L. Moore, the space opera of Lee Brackett or Flash Gordon, or the proto-superheroes like Doc Savage and The Shadow, they popularized action-driven fiction that would become the foundation of military sci-fi. This is also when one of the foundational texts of the genre got its start. A little magazine at the time known as Astounding Science Fiction, now today known as Analog Science Fiction. Still in print today and still the largest science fiction magazine in the world. Published in the 1930s by John C. Campbell, it became the premier genre magazine at the time. Notably, it got science and its heroes who thought their way out of a problem, as often fighting their way out, so correct that during World War II, the War Department actually approached them about several stories involving, let's just say, radioactive weapons and giant bombs that could erase cities. Something which Campbell actually successfully argued against censorship for, by pointing out that removing the stories would draw more attention than continuing to publish them. It's still, as I said, still published today, and the list of authors among its ranks is a laundry list of the finest in the genre, not even just within military science fiction. Frank Herbert, Orson Scott Card, Timothy Zahn, they all got their start, and for our aspiring writers in the room, are still taking submissions from new authors, so shoot your shot, folks. But the ones we especially want to talk about is a group of 3 of them from the 1940s. We go to the Philadelphia Naval Yard, where 3 fellows would each have their role in changing the future of speculative fiction forever. Isaac Asimov, the Futurian who really bit hard on hard science fiction and the thinking man instead of fighting their way out of problems. L. Sprague de Camp, the champion of pulp, who would really keep the torch alive for not just fantasy and alternate history, but pulp, until it became popular in the 60s and 70s. And last, but never least, especially in this genre, was a naval officer by the name of Robert A. Heinlein. The great-granddaddy of the genre himself. Frankly, I could talk about Heinlein for the next hour. This could just be a Heinlein panel. And show of hands, how many of you have ever read a book by him? I'll get a lot more of those hands raised by this time next year, you believe me. The man's body of work changed style, tone, approach, even political and thematics. Almost every other book. He tackled everything from free love and recreational drug use and Stranger in a Strange Land, to militant libertarianism with The Moon as a Harsh Mistress, to the grandfather paradox with All You Zombies, where a man literally becomes his own grandmother and grandfather. What? This is why you read Heinlein! He introduced more new words and concepts and phrases to the English language. Everything from grok to there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, than almost any author since Shakespeare. And his work is expansive. As I said.
Seems basically a bookstore.
So please, hit up your bookstore, find something by him. But if you have to pick just one, have I got the book for you? Say it with me, folks. Come on, you sons of bitches! Do you want to live forever? That is actually not a line from the book, but from Dan Daly, a U.S. Marine Corps sergeant in World War I, who, with a German bullet knocking off his helmet at Belleau Wood, looked back to his men, asked they follow, and charged up a hill under withering fire, for which he has 2 medals of honor, one of which, for our locals, is in Quantico in the U.S. Marine Corps Museum. And it's the opening quote to the book, followed by one of the greatest opening paragraphs. I always get the shakes before a drop. I've had the injections, of course, and hypnotic preparation, and it stands to reason I can't really be afraid. The ship's psychiatrist has checked my brainwaves and asked me silly questions while I was asleep, and he tells me it isn't fear, it isn't anything important. It's just the trembling of an eager racehorse in the starting gate. I couldn't say about that. I've never been a racehorse, but the fact is, I'm scared silly every time. And what follows is one of the greatest opening chapters as our Space Marines fight their way through the ranks of aliens in the names of the glory of the Terran Federation. And what follows is one of the genre's greatest novels. Starship Troopers fires on all cylinders, with Heinlein bringing as much fire and fervor to scenes of philosophical discussion and a coming-of-age story as any scenes of combats and mecha. Notably, the novel centers on a young Filipino man, Juan, Johnnie, Rico, who enlists as a soldier in the Mobile Infantry, our first significant non-white protagonist in science fiction history. It follows his story from a young man unsure of where to go, all the way to becoming a commanding officer in the military. His first taste of combat, his first loss, his first love, the loss of his family and his hometown, as he goes from enlisted soldier to NCO to officer, as he goes from a scared young man to a brave leader who still gets the shakes every time he drops. Each chapter opens with a historical or literary quote, everything from Sun Tzu to Kipling, and there are references to historical and philosophical debates. Our World War II veterans would have recognized that each ship in the book is the name of a Medal of Honor recipient from the war who was killed in combat. Naturally, it's also as armored space marines, space bugs, and dropping from orbit to kill violent aliens. So it's not just a thinking man's book, it's an action lover's book. Why was it revolutionary? Well, a number of short stories preceding it, one that's free to read online is called The Last Crusade, which is the first appearance of mech suits. Starship Troopers was the first military sci-fi novel to really nail down the tropes that everyone else would follow. It created and popularized the concept of Space Marines, and despite the best efforts of Games Workshop, kept them public domain. It was the first major work of genre literature to have a non-white protagonist, and more significantly, for a novel published less than 10 years after World War II, had members of the Axis powers, Japanese, German, and Italian in heroic roles, African Americans in leadership positions, and 20 years before it happened in real life, women in the military. Its portrayal of military life and philosophy is considered so authentic, it is the only work of fiction on the reading lists of U.S. military command colleges. To repeat, only work of fiction, not sci-fi, fiction. And it has some of the best combat scenes ever published that everyone has been chasing ever since. That first time you read of the drops never leaves your brain case. And of course, take a look at those mecha. For anyone in here who loves anime or giant robots or anything like that, the gorilla-like mech suits in Starship Troopers popularized it everywhere from later military sci-fi novels to Gundam, but we'll get to those in a minute. But let's tackle the grenade in the room, shall we? Is Starship Troopers a fascist work? You really can't bring it up in any fan or social forum without somebody saying it is fascist. An artist's rendition of what those comment sections in the bottom left. Since its publication, the book has proven controversial for its violence, its militarism, and from its people who I assume haven't read the book, claims it supports fascism. One of my favorite authors, Michael Moorcock, called Heinlein, and I quote, a fascist wanker to his face. But this blatantly ignores that the book contains multiple critiques of both fascism and totalitarianism in the book. It fixates on the Terran Federation, limiting voting and government jobs to veterans, while ignoring that this is a context in the novel. There were multiple world wars between our society and theirs, and that their military allows anyone to enlist. It allowed women to join 20 years before we did, and unlike our military even today, anyone in the Terran Federation can join, a quadriplegic or somebody disabled, or we don't even let people with ADHD enlist today. So it has universal liberty, full racial, gender, and sexual equality in a book from the 50s. And Starship Troopers is fascist only if your idea of fascism is military guys with guns, which unfortunately includes a director by the name of Paul Verhoeven. I know some people love the movie for what it is, and I do want to be clear, it's a fine movie, but it is a terrible Starship Troopers movie. Verhoeven never read it, and the screenwriter pulled the title, a couple names, and a few scenes and slapped them on a completely unrelated screenplay, which, I argue, are the best bits of the movie. All the moments you love and remember from the movie are often pulled from the book.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
Would you like to know more?
Like I said, it's not a bad movie, just a hideously unfaithful adaptation of Starship Troopers. Saying Starship Troopers is fascist or satire is like saying The Scarlet Letter is about Demi Moore bathing topless in the Puritan era with a bad Cockney accent. For those of you who don't know, that's The Scarlet Letter from around the same time period. An admission you've never actually read the book and that you've only seen a very unfaithful movie. But yes, the book is better. But to touch on that debate one last time before we move on to the fun stuff, Francis Truffaut, a French filmmaker, famously said that you can't make an anti-war movie because the military and warfare itself is, one, looks really cool in a movie. One of my favorite bits of trivia is Apocalypse Now has the helicopter scene with Wagner playing in the background. The director wanted them to think Nazis, and instead, what happened was, hey guys, we should play Ride of the Valkyrie every time we get in a helicopter. It looks so cool!
So many games.
Virtues like courage, selflessness, sacrifice, loyalty, these are inherently healthy values in any society. And I get while some militaristic themes reek of totalitarianism, and people are naturally averse to that. Yes, tyrants invoke militarism and patriotism, but so did the people who shot them. If you think of the Gestapo instead of Audie Murphy when you hear guns and uniforms, that's a personal issue. And of course, there are just contrarians that would ask themselves why they're taking the side of literal brain-eating monsters instead of the military in some of these works. Avatar, I get. The Tyranids, not so much.
Yeah. One is a sentient race that clearly has a civilization. The other one is just Indian.
I mean, you've even seen this pop up with Helldivers. Your enemies are literally giant acid-spitting bugs, Terminators, and brain-controlling zombie commanders. It's not complicated to take the side of your species here, folks.
That may or may not have made a pact with some sort of evil space god.
Hold that thought. Because there is one moment in Starship Troopers I think anyone who thinks that the book isn't a humanist work should read. Our behavior is different. How often have you seen a headline like this? 2 die attempting rescue of drowning child. If a man gets lost in the mountains, hundreds will search, and often 2 or 3 searchers are killed. But the next time somebody gets lost, just as many volunteers turn out. Poor arithmetic, but very human. It runs through all our folklore, all human religions, all our literature, a racial conviction that when one human needs rescue, others will not count the price. Weakness. It might well be the unique strength that wins us a galaxy. This was the golden age of military science fiction. Heinlein and his acolytes would take the genre to new heights and lay the foundation for everything that followed. The pulp and space opera influences are obviously still very present. Everything from the fishbowl helmets to the daring do of our heroes with a laser gun and the will to power. It still reflects the general optimism and unsettled cosmic science common within the rest of science fiction and that post-World War II period where we kicked ass, we took names, and we saved the world. Sometimes this is good. Books of this era are broader or weirder or do things that modern novels wouldn't. They touch on things like psionics that we now dismiss as not worthy of hard science fiction. And we didn't yet know that our solar system is, to the best of our knowledge, a graveyard beyond Earth. And of course, the World War II influence is heavy. Show of hands, how many of you know who Audie Murphy is? More of you need to know who Audie Murphy is, so listen to Sabaton, buy his autobiography, and get some gusto into your lives. He was the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Won every medal we had to give by 19. And has a ship named after him in Starship Troopers.
He also played himself in his own movie.
He did, and was a movie star, so...
What's the name of it? The Hell and Back.
Again, I could very easily turn this into an Audie Murphy panel. I will not. Moving on. But let's look at some other examples from the era. The first notable anti-war work of military science fiction, Slaughterhouse-5 by Kurt Vonnegut, which, much like the author himself, is as strange and surreal as you can imagine. Follows a World War II veteran named Billy Pilgrim, loosely based on Vonnegut, whom, while dealing with lingering trauma from the war, finds himself slipping back and forth within the time stream. And you just gotta read it to experience it. As brought up before the panel, The High Crusade by Paul Anderson, where a group of aliens invade Earth during the Middle Ages and actually lose to a group of natives preparing for the Crusades. With a group of crusading knights and peasants now in command of an alien spacecraft, they do what any logical middle-ager would do: lead a crusade against these demons from the sky, planet by planet, one by one. The Dorsai series by Gordon R. Dixon, which has humanity splintered into various subcultures along the stars, and the Dorsai, who settled on a very poor world, form a society where their main export is their brave, valiant fighters who fight wars across the cosmos.
I've got Tactics of Mistake on my nightstand at home.
A man of culture to the end, my friend. The Solarians by Norman Spinrad, notable for one of the best space battles in the genre, period, and for an early inversion of a military science fiction trope. The first aliens we encounter are heroic, out to defend the Earth, and come to us asking for help to fight off the people invading us, the Dulgari. And Wasp by Aaron Frank Russell, a British military science fiction novel with a novel twist on another genre trope, where it is not an alien subverting Earth, it's a human subverting an alien world. Because our hero is not a Flash Gordon daring-do type. He is a black ops soldier who specializes in sabotage, insurgency, and assassination, who is seeking to do, as a wasp might do to an elephant, take down a far more advanced alien race, or die trying. And of course, Star Trek, the original Star Trek, not whatever Paramount's crapping out today. It was actually inspired by a fellow named Gene Roddenberry, who primarily wrote for Westerns at the time, and whose own background reads like a World War II adventure novel. But when they had the USS Enterprise, the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, he dreamt of a vessel that could sail forever among the stars and do what Captain Cook and the old classical adventure novels and voyages did. So we got Captain Kirk and the voyages of the USS Enterprise, which is why that military structure is so strong in classical Star Trek, and why the more they've abandoned it, the worse the series got. But with Star Trek, we also come to the next era, the Silver Age of military sci-fi, the Vietnam era. We lost more than battles in Vietnam. Gone was the optimism of World War II in Korea. This would be a much more cynical era for the genre, and its works and authors would reflect that. Many of the authors themselves were Vietnam veterans, or occasionally the odd hippie who decided to write about the war. Their themes reflect much of that same work, the alienation of veterans from command, and often a civilian population as strange to them as the people they're fighting. Best seen in The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. It is maybe the perfect anti-war work of military science fiction. It follows a group of draftees that are forced to fight aliens for an Earth that, thanks to space-time dilation, grows more and more distant and alien to them with every passing deployment. It's a biting allegory for the alienation of veterans who come home and find a society that no longer treats them or remembers them the same way. A terrifying allegory for Vietnam, because some of the stuff it touches on with the soldiers in the novel, that they were experimented on, had drugs put to them, hypnotism, were all things that decades later we find out were done to Vietnam veterans. And it makes the perfect companion piece for Starship Troopers, which is much more optimistic. And, again, for any of our locals, the author, Joe Haldeman, is the guest of honor at Catplave this year. So for those of you who want to meet a master of the genre, be sure to check that convention out this fall. But you also have folks like David Drake, who, if you ever want to read another Vietnam veteran's take on the war, this man did it all. He was special forces and came back and became a mentor and role model to a generation of veterans who became authors. Among his own work, he was a master of horror, sword and sorcery, and of course, military science fiction, where his premier work is a series called Hammer Slammers that follows a group of mercenaries under the command of Colonel Aloy Hammer, who take high-risk jobs and heavy losses and never fail to get the job done. Gripping, hard, rancor science fiction that gets the blood flowing, your heart pumping, and makes you want to get into a bar fight. It's terrific. For those who prefer their tank stories to be a bit more technical-sided, you have the Bolo series by Keith Laumer. And when I say technical, I mean there are multi-detailed layouts of the designs for some of these tanks in the paperbacks. I mean that some of the tanks in these books, like the Bolo Mark 33, which weighs 33 tons, is the largest tank in all of fiction. Then you have Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven, who may be the best 1-2 punch in the genre at the time. Again, they were part of a think tank called Sigma, based out of DC, which recruited science fiction authors to weigh in on everything from nuclear war to First Contact. But they're mostly known for their work as authors, which is spectacular. The Ringworld known space series from Niven, which we'll touch on a bit when we talk about Halo. Pournelle's Falkenberg's Legion, but together they gave us Lucifer's Hammer, which is one of the best books ever written about a meteor strike on Earth. The Codominium series, which takes the Cold War into an interesting interstellar direction. And Football, an alien invasion novel that takes a realistic approach to aliens invading Earth in the late 70s, complete with a military coup against Jimmy Carter. And Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, maybe the best known work of military sci-fi ever published, and the best never written by a veteran. It's based on a short story published in Analog in 1977 when Card was just in his 20s, and it formed the backbone of the Ender saga that was only completed in 2022. It follows a child soldier named Ender Wiggin being trained to lead a role in humanity's war against alien invaders that, show of hands, who has not read Ender's Game? Fix that, because I'm not going to spoil one of the biggest twists in genre history.
Seriously, he's not kidding.
Read it, enjoy the bombs dropping, and I'll see you on the other
I
side.
read it on a trip to California, oh man, on a trip.
But it's a contender for one of the best science fiction novels of the 20th century. Check it out, and I hope it has the same impact on you it did on me when I read it the first time. Now, here's one, Gundam. For whatever reason, military science fiction was the dominant flavor of science fiction in Japan for close to half a century. You see this reflected in everything from, well, we'll get to some of those other ones, but Gundam is the best. Its roots of military sci-fi are there. There's a heavy focus on the horrors of war, the trauma of soldiers, and the future of warfare. If Starship Troopers conceived and popularized the mech suit, Gundam took it and made it its own genre, complete with model kits, action figures, toys, video games, and everything else we've come to love about it. And Western sci-fi fandom actually played a key role in getting it popularized in the US. Heinlein himself was a notable Gundam fanboy. But we see its influence everywhere from Macross to Space Battleship Yamato, and even what I think is the very best adaptation of Starship Troopers. Military sci-fi remains a popular genre in Japan. At the bottom, you see the light novel adaptations of the Honor Harrington series. So for all of you who've ever wanted Honor Harrington as a cute anime girl, congratulations, you get your wish.
I didn't know I did that.
Hayao Miyazaki actually got to start drawing covers for a few of them, so that feedback has gone both ways. And then we have Western pop culture. Aliens, which might well be the best work ever produced by Hollywood about military science fiction. Space Marines, a hopeless fight, kick-ass one-liners, what's not to love? And its influence ranges everywhere from, I guess, popularizing the Space Marine more than any book ever could, and one of my favorite tropes, the badass black NCO who curses and, God bless you all, Matthews. Godspeed and Semper Fi. And then there's the Terminator, with one shot of a skull being stomped on by a killer robot. It changed the favorite enemy of authors and directors in genre forever. Before, aliens were always the preferred enemy, but I think it was a twofold thing. One, as we began to explore the solar system, we saw how very alone we were. And then we had the tech boom and computers growing more and more intelligent. And Harlan Ellison wrote a short story by the name of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, that James Cameron very literally ripped off. The lawsuits proved that. As a settlement, all future Terminator movies had to credit Harlan Ellison, but as revenge, all future Terminator movies would be terrible. But this is why we have so many killer robots, evil artificial intelligence. This popularized it in a way that books really hadn't until that point. And of course, we have tabletop gaming. I talked a bit about this last year during my History of Tabletop Gaming panel, but tabletop gaming would not exist without that military fanboy segment, the folks who wanted to paint little Civil War soldiers or recreate battles of World War II. That is what gave us the foundation that became Dungeons and Dragons. But by the 80s, we started to see science fiction tabletop gaming, a little bit with Warhammer, but much more so with Battletech, a hard sci-fi mech combat game that actually gave us a number of authors, from Michael Stackpole to Blaine Lee Pardoe, that would come to filter back into the genre and contribute in their own unique ways. And it's the direct link between wargaming to tabletop to the next great medium of military science fiction, video games. More on that momentarily. But this brings us to the Bronze Age of military science fiction, aka the Baen Books era, so named after the publisher that published about 90% of the books for that 20-year period. A one-two punch of events changed how the genre was written. We watched on CNN as laser-guided missiles fell from outer space and annihilated the third largest military on the planet in real time. Quite literally, as Desert Storm made military science fiction play out in real life. And we watched terrorists fly planes into buildings on September the 11th, changing the face of warfare for an entire generation. The former was predicted by many works of military science fiction. The latter, nobody saw coming until it happened. But both would have their role on the genre. The global war on terror really was an interesting era for military science fiction. Pop culture, compared to even the Vietnam era, shied away from celebrating the war effort or even portraying it. I will not touch on some of the reasons why, but it's hilarious that with hindsight we had more movies where George Bush was the villain than bin Laden. But military science fiction was one of the few places that leaned into those feelings, that audience, and played to it gladly. There were multiple authors who owe their careers to becoming New York Times bestsellers in Baghdad and Bagram Air Base. And of course, there was another medium that did not shy away from scratching that itch society wanted to scratch. Didn't mind if people played Marines shooting religious extremists. Video games. More on that in a minute. But works for the era included the Honor Harrington series, written by David Weber. Conceived as a loving homage to Horatio Hornblower, it follows a young officer named Honor Harrington as she works her way up the ranks in the Star Kingdom of Manticore through a loosely told retelling of the Napoleonic Wars. The Posleen War series by John Ringo. A horde of literally cannibalistic aliens has Earth in its sights. And luckily, there's an alien race willing to intervene and sell us the weapons and technology we'll need to fight them off, if we also volunteer some of our soldiers to help them fight them off. So we have a choice. Do we become cannon fodder, or just plain old fodder? The World War series by Harry Turtledove. An alternate history military sci-fi series with a very simple premise. Somewhat technologically backward aliens, i.e. they have space travel, but their technology is recognizable to what we would have in the 2000s, invade in World War II, and the Axis and Allies powers join forces to fight them off. Armor by John Stakely. Performing, I think, a trifecta with the Forever War and Starship Troopers, Armor is one of the foundational works of the genre. It plays much more with the psychological effects of violence on human beings than other works, and takes armor and powered armor into new directions few other works have before or since. And the Draka series by S.M. Sterling, another alternate history series that follows a distaff counterpart of America, founded in South Africa in the 1800s, that is founded on authoritarian, borderline alien ideals. The technology goes off in weird directions. It's, depending on how you look at it, a forerunner to steampunk. And the taste for crunchy military sci-fi of the time is reflected that each paperback came with detailed, I guess, almost layouts for the guns and weapons and tech in the novels. But to give you an idea of just what you're in for, the bad guys are attacking the Nazis in the first book, and you feel bad for the Nazis. That's how evil the Draka are. But after 20 years of writing fantasy, Sterling has returned to the genre with a new series that has a much more, I guess, contemporary premise. A US military officer and 4 historical college students are sent back in time to the Roman era with a simple mission: prevent nuclear war by saving the Roman Empire. Yes! You will think of Rome. All of you will think of Rome. And the Cobra series by Timothy Zahn. From a longtime contributor to Analog, it focuses on one key conflict. What happens to these legions of super soldiers when they no longer have a war to fight and the government that created them no longer wants them around? Your answer? A 10-book series, and the author gets asked to be the savior of Star Wars. Twice. Which is another pop culture of the era, is the Star Wars expanded universe. What really saved Star Wars from ending up like He-Man or Thundercats or any other trend from the 80s was you had the expanded universe novels that kept it popular, tapped some of the best authors of the era: Timothy Zahn, Michael Stackpole, Kevin J. Anderson, Karen Travis, and did things with the Star Wars universe that the movies never could, or unfortunately ever did. They took things into wild directions: the World War I fighter pilot style Rogue Squadron, the bloody rancor stories of the Clone Wars from Karen Travis. Jedi Academy is very loosely based off the U.S. Air Force Academy, near where Kevin J. Anderson was a teacher. These sold over 100 million copies and kept Star Wars alive. The new YA-influenced Star Wars novels have not done as well. But at last we come to the big splashy one, Halo. The launching point for one of the most successful video game and media franchises of all time, not counting the TV series. Halo was a massive game changer in military science fiction at the era, and especially in gaming. There had been original sci-fi and fantasy game franchises before, but Halo sold over 5 million copies, and tie-in novels, toys, action figures, a movie deal before the second game came out. It was proof of the potential not only of the first-person shooter. Again, we'd had games like Doom, Wolfenstein, Unreal Tournament, but Halo blew things up to a whole new level and resonated with audiences in a way that no other work of pop culture did. I will point out, they cut out a scene where captured Marines are beheaded by the Covenant. And your enemy is not just religious extremists, they're communist religious extremists. They knew their genre, they knew their audience, and they knew their roots. John Stakely's Armor and Larry Niven's Ringworld are very clearly the DNA of the Halo series. In fact, if you look at the early beta versions of Halo, the Ringworld influence is especially apparent. The Covenant were much more cat-like, like the alien Kazin in the Ringworld novels. And, of course, the giant titular orbital ring. But for the most part, Larry Niven and Bungie have had a good relationship about that, even if Larry Niven occasionally makes fun of it as a poor man's Ringworld.
Quake 1 was more like fantasy sci-fi, but from Quake 2, 3, and 4, that's kind of went more into, I think, military sci-fi in terms of trying to sell a one-man sort of thing,
But this was the first-person shooter golden age. Everything from the Doom reboot, to Wolfenstein's reboot, to new franchises like Gears of War, Vanquish, XCOM, Metal Gear. This was for people who liked shooty bang bang games. Everything that put you in the shoes of a cyborg ninja to a space marine to anything in between. This was your golden age. And it took the gaming genre to new commercial heights as of yet unseen. This was a significant reason why gaming succeeded movies as the most financially successful part of pop culture. This genre propelled it. And while it did stagnate for a few years, I am very happy that Helldivers 2 seems like a brilliant return to form for the genre. And not just because it has a beautiful tongue-in-cheek storyline, great community, and a near-perfect gameplay loop. I'm sorry, I had to include a few of the memes.
San Francisco is gone now! This is for the good of all Americans!
Never ever doubt the America that Japan can write in a video game.
Wingman moved to California twice.
But this brings us to the modern age of military SF, the Indie or Iron Age, depending on who you're asking. Some trad publishers still put out the occasional work. Even Baen is mostly reoriented to hard science fiction for the most part. But independent publishing, especially from mid-majors like Wargate, Aethon, Chris Kennedy, Canon, have been pushing the genre in bold new directions, with a significant pivot. If the Bronze Age was fiction written for people fighting the War on Terror, or those who knew who did, this is fiction written by veterans of the War on Terror, and many of the themes reflect that. You see a return of the alienation and cynicism of the Vietnam-era military science fiction. More optimistically, much as with our military, you've seen the largest group of female authors in genre than any point in history. While they've been around since Elizabeth Moon as far back as the 70s, you've seen a whole new generation of authors of different backgrounds join the genre. And of course, the video game influence is very, very strong. This is everywhere from the lit RPG genre, progression fantasy, or just to give one example, the respawn mechanic has been played with in several military science fiction stories. Everything from comedy to horror to the price of death in military has been explored using one mechanic. Although I admit nobody quite had the idea to use drop pods as self-guided suicide missiles like the Helldivers did, so...
Or even shaped like bullets.
The Galaxy's Edge series by Nick Cole and Jason Anspach. Launched from a single title that is very much a riff on the Afghanistan War, this series now covers multiple authors, multiple plot arcs, and several series and spin-offs, hard-knuckle action, gripping storytelling, and notable that when Disney tried launching their own Galaxy's Edge, they sued Cole and Anspach over the rights to the name. And our fighting boys beat Disney. Give them a round of applause. Take that, mouse. The Drop Troopers series by Rick Partlow, which is very much a War on Terror veterans riff on Starship Troopers, with the tactics and military aesthetic updated for that era. As well as the fact that Partlow himself is a very intense and reliable... He is very much the machine gun of authors, by which I mean he's intense, he's reliable, and he can crank out 80 books in a decade.
George R. R. Martin, get your heart out.
George R. R. Martin can do a lot of stuff that I can't say right now.
Besides finish his book.
Never gonna happen.
Yeah.
From a local author, we have the Land and Sea series by Blaine Lee Pardoe, a former Battletech author who created a series where aliens invade the Earth in the 2030s. They're primarily sea-dwelling, and we have to come up with tech that can fight them with 70% of the planet already lost to the invaders. The notable thing is, having come from Battletech, he knows his mecha, and every mecha in the series is something being worked on by DARPA today. So maybe 20 years from now, we'll look back at this series as ripped from the headlines. For now, it's just a ripping good time. Beyond Enemies by Marissa Wolf. For all of our tank story lovers, those who like David Drake and Keith Laumer, Marissa Wolf delivers a new twist on it with a wicked sense of humor, good friendship, and doesn't lose the edge of authenticity. As I said, we're also seeing a large number of female authors in the genre that are doing great work. Casey Azell, Melissa Olthoff. So you don't have to be a crusty old NCO who's seen combat for 20 years to write in genre. Just write what you know, love it, and give us something that kicks ass. Grimm's War by Jeffrey Haskell. It started as a loving homage to Honor Harrington riffing on the Napoleonic Wars, except instead of Napoleon, it's the Iraq War and Generation Kill. It follows a disgraced military officer who joins a Forlorn Hope regiment to redeem himself. Wild twists on the genre, great combat, and a shockingly well-handled horror element. So why is military science fiction popular? I have some theories that I would like to run by you beautiful folks. From our earliest civilizations to the modern day, humanity has a fixation on war and violence, but also on glory and heroes. So why would our future reflect any differently? Our oldest written stories show this, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to Beowulf. the oldest work of English literature. Often the oldest and sometimes only fragments of a society that survives are the traces of stories about its heroes. Heroism and valor are virtues in every healthy society. The desire for glory and adventure encoded in our DNA. As Starship Troopers put it, these may well be the skills that win us a galaxy. Or, well, give me a moment. You've seen the Helldivers trailer. I want to see how many of you know this one.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage. A challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
You're laughing, but I don't hear you speaking Lava Monster right now, so thank a Marine. And for our veterans in the room, I know the recruiter said you could be on Balrog protection detail, but then you spent the next 5 years watching Humvees. And again, you laugh, but there's also that voice in the back of your head, isn't there? Damn it, that looks cool. I could do that. Could I be a hero like that? And that is something primal, something beautiful, something human. And again, Robert E. Heinlein, okay.
Uh-oh.
Doot.
Technology. You get escapism from first line a little bit.
That's my front one.
And again, Robert A. Heinlein reflects that with another of his books by the title of Glory Road, that human desire to be a hero. What did I want? I wanted the hurtling moons of Barsoom. I wanted Story's-End and Partesme, and Holmes shaking me awake to tell me the game's afoot. I wanted to float down the Mississippi on a raft and elude a mob in the company of the Duke of Bilgewater and the Lost Dauphin. I wanted Prester John and Excalibur held by a moon-wide arm out of a silent lake. I wanted to sail with Ulysses and with Tros of Samothrace and to eat the lotus in a land that seemed always afternoon. I wanted the feeling of romance and sense of wonder I had known when I was a kid. I wanted the world to be the way they had promised me it was going to be, instead of the tawdry, lousy, fouled-up mess that it is. Again, it's fundamentally human to want to be a hero, that call to action, everything from our men and women who serve in the military to every time you pick up a controller. That hunger for glory, that quest to be something more. C.S. Lewis, I think, put it best when explaining why he wrote what he did. When asked why he wrote fairy stories, or fantasy, or science fiction. Stories for children. Wouldn't they be better without something so fantastic? He said, every child knows monsters are real, whether it be a beast in their closet, an abusive parent, or a bully on the playground. Stories like this exist so that they know monsters can be slain. That is why we tell stories about heroes, so that when the time comes and it's time for you to step up, your legs don't buckle. You have a fire in your heart instead of fear, and you step up and tackle that challenge with gusto. Whether it be to fight the clankers in Malevelon Creek, to stick up for a friend being bullied, to march that extra mile, that is fundamentally human, and is perhaps the very thing that will make humanity seek a new future among the stars and finally conquer the final frontier. We have always told stories about heroes, be they real or fictional. Horatius at the bridge, Audie Murphy on a burning tank destroyer, Master Chief riding a missile into an alien armada. We find heroism an inherently aspirational thing, and it is the beating heart of the military science fiction genre, a reflection of that primal instinct and our fondest wish as a species, that even as humanity spreads to the stars, even under alien skies, we will do what we always have, look up at the stars with wonder, seeking our place in the universe, hungry for glory and adventure, and at the end of it all, come together and share stories about the heroes who found them. That is military science fiction. That is human. And that is a part of every one of us. And for those of you who want to find my work elsewhere, I have a new story in Anvil number 4, which also has another story by Blaine Lee Pardoe from earlier. And if you want to read my story in it for free, that QR code is your best friend. For those of you who like hundreds of dollars of free books, I'm launching a magazine later this year called Battleborn. Sign up for the mailing list in the next week, and we'll send you $200 worth of free fiction. Can't beat free. And for those of you who haven't gotten tired of me giving my hot takes, factual opinions, and staring at my ugly mug, you can find me on social here. My books, They're Here and Worlds Long Lost, are available everywhere fine books are sold. And if you enjoyed this panel, please let the wonderful folks at MAGFest know. And until next time, keep a story in your heart, a fire in your belly, and I will see you all on the battlefield.